Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Hi, everyone. Garnet Jennis here. Welcome to another episode of the Resuming Debate podcast. We have talked about the situation in Sudan once before. And if you're a new listener, you can go back to episode 50, where we talked about the situation in Sudan. Our discussion today is going to be complementary to that, so worth listening to both episodes, but drilling down on some of the particular challenges that we're seeing right now. So why did I think it was important to do two episodes on Sudan, to do a second one? The situation in Sudan is not getting the attention that it deserves. This is an incredibly generationally devastating humanitarian situation. And not to downplay some of the other tragedies that are happening in the world that are getting a lot more attention, but just in terms of raw numbers and scale, the people that are likely to die this year and next year, it is orders of magnitude worse. And this should give us a real sense of urgency to understand what we can do to prevent millions of people from dying in the next year, what steps we can take, what steps our governments can take. And I'm very pleased that we have two guests that can help shed some light on the current situation and what we can do about it. I'm very pleased to be joined by Unni Krishnan, who's the Global Humanitarian Director of Plan International. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
And Abier Mustafa, who's the chairperson of the Sudanese Community Association of Ontario. Great to see you again.
Great to see you too. Thank you.
So let's start by setting the stage for those who are less familiar. And maybe this time, instead of starting with the conflict, we'll start with some numbers and some realities about just what the devastating human impact of the situation is. So, Unni, why don't you start with a little bit of that context? What are we talking about in terms of the impact of the current situation on the people in Sudan?
Firstly, Garnet, very grateful for bringing a spotlight on Sudan. And as we know now, the crisis is not unfolding just inside Sudan. We already know close to more than 3 million people have actually crossed the border into another 6 countries. And Plan International is responding to the humanitarian crisis both inside Sudan as well as the neighboring countries which are hosting Sudanese people who have crossed the border. I'm quite sure that other fellow panelists will be able to explain more about who they are they refugees, asylum seekers, and all range of things. So we are talking about 7 countries now bearing the impact of this. No words can truly capture what is actually unfolding there. We are talking about a crisis where more than half the population of Sudan, that is nearly 25 million people, who are impacted by the crisis. More than 5 million children, close to 5 million children, are being displaced. This is almost the population of Ireland. So this is the largest displacement of children in the world today. We have never seen anything of this in magnitude and intensity in recent times. And all of them they have their own individual stories, both of suffering as well as how they are trying to beat the odds. At some stage, I'll be very keen. I was actually at the border between Sudan and Chad recently, and I met a mother with 4 children, and their youngest child is about 4 months old. She has been walking for more than 11 months to cross into Chad. It is not that the situation in Chad is that great, very limited resources there, but very generous people and local communities and the government. I'm actually a medical doctor by training, but you wouldn't need a medical degree. You can see children are arriving hungry, sick, malnourished, dehydrated, and most of them have witnessed things which no child should ever witness. So we are talking about a crisis which is unprecedented in recent times.
Yeah, and I appreciate you touched on both the magnitude of the numbers and also sharing an individual story. I think we need to keep both of those things in mind, that the sheer numbers and also how those numbers represent individuals and stories and particular experiences. So you're saying 25 million affected, many of those starving, at risk of starvation, 5 million children displaced. So this is a conflict, but a conflict that is the biggest impact is in terms of starvation, the resource impacts. Abier, do you want to share some of your perspective on kind of the magnitude, the impact of what we're seeing?
Well, first, for me, this is a very emotional, always when we talk about Sudan and what's happening there, because these are my families, my friends, my relatives who are suffering right now. Because people, just like when the war started in Khartoum, people moved to Madani, Al Jazeera state, and then they keep moving. So like what happened in Al Jazeera is actually happening to my family in Khartoum, because they moved to that part of Sudan and they just keep moving and displaced internally. So I apologize, because I'm not sure if I can like press my tears, but I'll try to be.
No need to apologize. And I think we're going to talk about large numbers, but also individual human impacts. And I think it's good for people to hear and understand the intensity of those impacts. And if we're talking about 5 million children, 25 million people affected, it's that many families that are going through the same things that you're going through. So sorry, go ahead. We appreciate your testimony on this.
For what's happening, it's the intensity of what's happening. Like when you have someone, we have some people, they can't access drinking water. But when we have militia is poisoning the drinking water, that is another scale of what's happening. We have people who are looting people houses. But when you have like someone being killed only because he's trying to protect his daughter or his wife, that's another scale of the conflict. So what we're seeing, like atrocities that we haven't seen for ages in wars, and this is not about war about two generals. This is against the human beings of Sudan. This is against the Sudanese civilians. And I can't think of how some people who are doing this can bring democracy. Like, what is democracy if you don't have civilians, live civilians to control or to rule? So it's for us as a Sudanese nationals, what's happening doesn't make any sense, because we don't feel like one part of the war is considering us on this war.
Mm-hmm. So the context of what brings us to this, for those who are less familiar, is basically you have a few years ago you had a popular movement that overthrew a long-established dictator. There were kind of ongoing efforts to bring about democracy through kind of power-sharing structures with the existing military, and those eventually broke down. And what followed was a civil war between the military and a like almost a second military, but really a state supported militia that had been used by the previous regime. So you have the Sudanese Armed Forces and the RSF, formerly known as the Janjaweed, that are now two rival militaries that had been both used by the previous regime that are now fighting each other, and both showing just reckless, shameless disregard for the well-being of civilians. This conflict has been going on now for about a year and a half, and Abier, maybe just sticking with you. I mean, you talked about the Sudanese community here in Canada. You represent the Sudanese Community Association of Ontario. How is the Canadian Sudanese diaspora community engaging with and responding to these events, the democracy movement, and then where we are now with this terrible civil war?
As a Sudanese Canadian, we have the Sudanese Canadian communities association, which like all for the like one body for all Sudanese communities across Canada, and we've been working closely with the Canadian government, Minister of Foreign Affairs in evacuation of Sudanese Canadians, and international development with Mr. Hussein in international funds, and with IRCC in having like a sort of like pathway or temporary protection for our families back in Sudan to bring them to Canada on program that similar to the Ukrainian one. Didn't happen, but we have something else for Sudanese nationals. But anyway, so our engagement is, I think this is one of the good things that happened with the Canadian government, try to have the diaspora, involved in their whatever concern that they have in their country of origin. But we couldn't see the same when it comes to the funds. Like when you have international funds goes, we have a Sudanese organization that are willing to participate and be like accountable to the Canadian government, and they have a central kitchens out there in Sudan, so it's much easier for the Canadian government to work with this. But unfortunately, the Canadian government emphasized that they need to work with their international partners, like UN agencies and people that in the beginning of the war, they just stopped working in Sudan. So now we see the funds going to the the refugee outside Sudan, but it can't reach the people who need it inside Sudan, in central Sudan, in Al Jazeera state or in Darfur. So that's where you can use sort of like a Sudanese organizations with the Canadian background. These are registered organizations in Canada. So it's much easier for the government to work with them. And they have central kitchens out there where they can prove that they had just feed people, so they don't use their lives because just they are hungry.
Mm-hmm. So just a couple distinctions, maybe for those that are less familiar. When we're talking about a refugee, formally, that is someone who has left their country and gone to a different country seeking refuge. Another term that we use is an internally displaced person, who is similar to a refugee in that they've had to flee their home, but they haven't crossed an international border. They've just had to flee to somewhere else within their country. So. Back to you, Unni. If you can share a little bit, just building off that, about the work you're doing. Are you able to operate inside of Sudan, and what kinds of things is the international community doing or able to do to provide? I mean, obviously, we want to see an end to the conflict, and we'll talk a bit about that. But to provide assistance to people who are at risk of starvation in the meantime.
Yeah, starvation is already happening there. And you clearly said, Garnet, that the distinction between refugees and asylum seekers as one group who have crossed an international border, and then there are internally displaced people. There are a total of 11 million such people, and 3 million of them have already crossed the border. They are not tourists. They often flee with one backpack, with one set of clothes, like the mother I was referring to. Heartbreaking stories what they go through. Even their journeys are very unsafe. Plan International, we have been working inside Sudan for more than 35 years in almost every place, including Darfur. Most of our staff are local Sudanese people. They've been born there. They've been working in those communities. They are known within the community, so they are able to engage with them. And they truly follow the humanitarian principles. As humanitarian agencies and humanitarian workers, we don't take sides with parties involved in the conflict. The only group with whom we take sides are children and other vulnerable groups like women. And I'm specifically saying women and girls because we are more clear about the hunger and the starvation issue. Way back in May itself, it was known there was an increase of 200% in the food prices inside Sudan. So you can only imagine how difficult it is for people to access food. And then we are also, as Plan International, we are also working in the neighboring countries such as Chad, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, Uganda, South Sudan, which is hosting many of these refugees. We are seeing the same thing, both internally in Sudan. Of course, the intensity is more. And as Abier said, the access is difficult. Communication is difficult. Getting relief supplies into some of the hotspots such as Darfur is difficult. At the same time, local groups, local communities, including our own local staff, etc., are doing an heroic job, I would say an incredible job under difficult circumstances. What do I mean by difficult circumstances? Two things. Schools are being targeted. Schools are being bombed. Hospitals are being targeted in the bombing. So what happens is that in a situation where food is almost impossible to find, starvation is trending in many of the places, then you see injuries coming from the war or the conflict and the missile strikes. And at a time they need support and care, they're not getting it. I must highlight two more things. All suffering is not visible. I'm specifically referring to the emotional care and support and psychological and aspects of the war. And why is it even more important? We have heard testimony after testimony to young children, listening to young girls who have told us that rape and sexual violence have been systematically deployed as a tool or a war weapon in this crisis. That must stop. You were speaking about peace and getting ceasefire. Absolutely. So stopping the war and the conflict and the bombing is absolutely critical. Stopping the targeting the civilians, hospitals, schools, etc. is absolutely critical. Improving aid delivery, both the access for relief workers and relief supplies is critical. And finally, most importantly, addressing the causes and the dynamics of the conflict so that we don't end up in discussing this issue again in the years to come. So all are needed. 1,000 things are needed, but we believe that especially the most vulnerable, such as children, especially girls and women, are the starting point.
Mm-hmm. So let me pick up on that to drill into one specific item, and that is humanitarian access. You mentioned that it's challenging. Specifically, why is it challenging? Are the two belligerents blocking access? Are you seeing both sides targeting humanitarian workers or humanitarian activities? What's exactly the dynamic around being able to get aid in?
Yeah. Allow me to explain what a Sudanese woman told me when I was in Chad at the border in Adre. She reminded me of an African proverb, which basically said, when two big elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Yes. So honestly, when it comes to children, they don't know what weapons these groups are carrying, which uniform they are wearing. All they know, what we know is that children never start war, but they always bear the brunt of everything. That's exactly what we say. In terms of access, inside Sudan, movements are definitely difficult and limited. Of course, I have my own colleagues, I spoke to them today, working in places like Kassala or even in Darfur and other places, they are very much there. But the movements are difficult. So automatically when trucks and other things carrying supplies go into some of the hotspots, it gets stopped and all those things are there. The second is taking from Madre. We just heard, a few hours before we started this podcast, literally we heard today that the government of Sudan is extending the corridor they have opened a few months ago. They are keeping it open for 3 months. This is really great news. That means from Chad, you can take supplies. Just to be clear, when I'm talking about Adre or Chad, hunger, starvation is the problem. Food is the solution to some extent. Of course, we need peace. And these supplies are possible from literally 2 hours away from Darfur, which is basically the driving distance between Ottawa to Montreal. That's what it takes to carry the stuff from Chad border into Darfur, the hotspots. But, unsafe, the challenges when the bombings takes place, targeted attack on civilians and relief supplies, that makes the delivery of aid and also the safety of the relief workers absolutely. I'm not just referring to the people who are deployed from other parts of the world who have experience of working in such contexts. I have colleagues from Canada to other places who have been deployed there in the past. But I'm talking to even our own local staff, Sudanese staff, who live in the communities, who work 24/7. Most importantly, since the conflict started, finding it very difficult to continue their life support and lifeline support they are providing there.
Mm-hmm. Abier, do you have anything you want to add on the humanitarian access or assistance front to what Unni was saying?
Yeah, it's the problem for us. You can like disengage the political conflicts and the military conflicts from the humanitarian aid, because like the the Sudanese army, they would say this humanitarian aid coming from Chad, it's like bringing weapons for the RSF, in Darfur. And you have the same accusations with anything coming from Port Sudan, from the other part of the, like where the government is having control. So that's why like each of them trying to stop the humanitarian aid because of suspicious of like carrying weapons and other like supplies for the militia or for the army.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the same time, you see the only bank work in Sudan is Bank of Khartoum, which is like controlled by the United Arab Emirates. And you have the network is working in Sudan now in Janjaweed area, in RSF areas, is Starlink, Elon Musk. So this, like, you can't have any connection with the outside world unless you are in a way dealing with the RSF, because either you need, they call it, the application call it Bankak for Bank of Khartoum, to have money from your family outside Sudan and to contact them. So that's mean they are monitoring your communication with your family, and you have to do that through Starlink, so through them. So in a way, we are like hooked, with the RSF, and they control in the areas that under their control.
Okay, so let me probe that a little bit. So you're describing, people in the diaspora, maybe they want to send money to family members. There is a problem of access. And we know that the UAE, and I want to talk a bit about this further in a bit, but the UAE is, it seems, supporting the RSF, which is one of the two belligerents. And, in terms of Starlink, is the implication of what you're saying that there's some connection between Starlink and the UAE, or that's like, what's the issue there exactly?
So the issue is like the RSF, like when the RSF coming, they disconnect the all communications in the area. So the only communication work is the Starlink, and they bring the equipment with them. Yeah. So when they bring the satellites, they start like to sell this for people, to stay for 1 hour, for 2 hours online. Okay. So that's not only to have money out of that,
right,
not to make money, but as well to control the communication and to monitor the communications is going out. So they know that if someone is like contacting the army, if someone is like giving their what they call it, like their information, selling out them, anything like that. So
okay, so the issue isn't so much with Starlink itself, but the issue is that the sort of connection to Starlink from the ground is being controlled by the RSF. They're cutting everybody else off, forcing them to rely on satellite, and then controlling that access. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's interesting and tragic. Not only are they controlling the flow of physical resources, but they're trying to control the flow of information and banking access.
Yeah.
You mentioned as well sort of this discourse around like if aid is going into an area controlled by one group or the other, that it's sort of perceived as helping that group. Of course, humanitarian assistance isn't. It's not for the armed groups. It's for the people. But there's always these concerns about diversion or things that may be dual use. Maybe back to you, Unni. How are you managing these sort of perceptions around how that humanitarian aid may be diverted by armed actors?
Yeah, as it's clear, lives and truth are the first two casualties in any conflict or war today. It's even more complex with misinformation, disinformation, fake news. You see it unfolding on a daily basis. So Plan International, the type of services we provide, to give you an idea how it unfolds, is we provide food assistance, which includes community kitchens, and there are certain international standards we need to follow, what is known as the sphere standards. Like we can't just distribute any food. We need to make sure that there are micronutrients for pregnant women who are in large numbers, and for children, they will need iodine and those kinds of things. Then water supply is critical because there is already cholera outbreaks. Just imagine, cholera is very critical because if a child contracts cholera, the child will contract dehydration. Once a child contracts dehydration, the child could die within 6 hours. So we always say battle against cholera is a race against time. You need to act very quickly. So, and then also any nutrition and food outcome you want to see, if there is no wash program, hand wash, etc., it won't. So food goes with wash. The second element is the emotional care and support. As I just explained, children who have witnessed and have sustained the trauma and inexplicable things. And also thanks to including supporting from the support coming from the Canadian government and the Canadian public and also other donors, we also provide support for young girls who have sustained, both sexual and gender violence, issues around, what complications that come out of it. One of the services we do is, let me put it this way. We run an activity called Child Friendly Space, which is a small space where children can come and they can engage in some recreational activities, some art, possibly some theater, and most importantly, they also get some nutritious meals there. The same thing, we also run temporary learning spaces, providing that opportunity for a child to continue learning. And for children, Garnet, that is absolutely critical. In all conflict zones where I have worked, and our experience is if you ask children, even not in conflict zones, if you ask them, they say only 3 things. Stop bombing our schools and, stop killing us. The second is give us some food. The third, we want to play. Fourth one, we want to learn. So these things are critical. And some donors really do not understand the importance of education, importance of protection for children. And that is absolutely critical. We have had some really good experience with the Canadian government in many instances. But at the same time, as Abier said, when it comes to the Sudan response, we wish that the Canadian government should and could do more. And you have been a champion of the feminist, foreign policy approaches, which prioritizes especially young girls and women. That intention in the foreign policy must be demonstrated as practice. And actually, children in Sudan is telling us, children who have crossed the border from Sudan to other countries are telling us the world has abandoned them. This is a time to step up that support. So as far as in our movements are concerned, since it is mostly done by local staff, but I've been there and some of my colleagues who are child protection experts, anti-trafficking experts, those experts who work with the gender-based violence, and education experts, we are deployed from different parts of the world who have worked in similar conflict settings to support our teams in Chad, inside Sudan, and other neighboring countries to scale up. Of course, we are like any other agency. We face challenges when it comes to delivery and continuing our work. But in any conflict, we always negotiate with all parties involved in the conflict because our priority is getting those support and our priority is always children. So anything that will help us to get those support is what we always focus on. Mm-hmm. It's not easy, but we need to keep trying. We can't give up.
Yeah, exactly. So we've had a good discussion so far about humanitarian assistance, and just to sort of add some numbers. I've heard on this projections are we're going to see 2 to 2.5 million people die this year, and potentially well over 10 next year. So just to give a sense of comparison, for this year alone, that is more than the entire population of the Gaza Strip. Not that we shouldn't be paying attention to what's happening in the Middle East, but in terms of numbers, the number of people expected to die this year in conflict or starvation, and that really speaks to the urgency, both of looking at the humanitarian issues, but also addressing underlying causes. Abier, you have a shirt on that our YouTube audience will see, and people obviously listening to the audio channels won't, that says "Stop War in Sudan," and that's obviously at the root of this, right? How do we stop the war? So everything I've heard on this says you've got 2 very bad actors. Nobody that I've spoken to is keen on one or the other winning. They just want to see a stop to the conflict and steps taken to see if we can really revitalize the presence of the civilian-led democracy movement. What are the steps that you would see that the international community can take to address the underlying issues to stop the war?
Well, you can enforce the international community to have interest in Sudan, but in small scales, there is something that each and every country can do. You have a Sudanese diaspora in your country. For example, we have in Canada, we have a Sudanese Canadian who are willing to go in on the ground to provide for their people. And in terms of the immigration program that you are aware about, we have this reunification program for families, for people who are affected by war in Sudan, to bring to Canada. We are putting money in banks in Canada to bring our people. So if I'm putting for myself, I'm bringing 3 families from like my sister, my father, and my brother. So 3 separate families. I have to put 50 to 60K in the bank in Canada. At the same time, I have to provide for these people, either if they are in Sudan or they fled to a neighbor country. At the same time, I cannot access that money in my bank account. And the IRCC, the immigration, wouldn't bring these people within 1 year, as they said. So how on earth, we are like asking the international community, if you cannot commit to the 10,000 that you said you will bring, it doesn't make any sense for me to try to shout out a call for like help Sudan, right? So I believe if each and every country have done as small as a 10,000 people that you helped, then these 10,000 will help their people back in Sudan. And we won't need anything else. It's just like support us so we can support our families back there.
Okay, so I want to follow up on the strategies for stopping the war piece, but just on the immigration side, you're describing a program. Essentially, it's like it's a family reunification combined with a private refugee sponsorship type of model where people have to put money aside to support those who come. How many people have come to Canada so far under this program? The war's been going for about 1.5 years, I think, right? So
don't let me start with that. They approved 11 people who are already inside Canada on a visitor visa or a super visa. That's 11 people. We are expecting until this December a handful of people, as the Minister Miller said. Okay, so the promise was like within 1 year we will have 3,250 applications. That's mean 7,000 people. So now we say like by December we don't even have like a 100 coming. So and you have my money, so don't tell me about the humanitarian part of it. It's just, if we can't talk about human rights in Sudan if we can't talk about human rights in Canada. As simple as that.
Okay. Thank you for sharing those details. Just now, no. Thanks for sharing that. But back now to the question of how we stop these belligerents from shooting at each other and everybody in between. What steps do you think the government of Canada or other governments can take to end the conflict?
So basically, if you try to start any negotiation, what we see in the ground that like things start to be a little bit worse. Why? Because everyone wants to control more lands, more cities, so that he can like have strong negotiations. So going to negotiation wouldn't help. You need to stop the outsiders. Let's put it that nice. Outsiders. The countries that who are support both sides, if they stopped, everything will slow down. Okay, so and to be honest, for me, is the whole political the political parties in Sudan. They are part of that war. They were there for 4 years. Now they're talking about the al-Bashir regime is still there. They had the commission, to get rid of all of them. They didn't. Now they say that the army is hacked by the previous regime. You were there for 4 years. You didn't clean it up. So for me, is the political, civilian, blah, 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 is not working in Sudan. You need the same military force that they are supporting the both group just to stop that support. When this is like dry out, everything will finish.
Okay, so you need to stop outside support to the belligerents. So let's dig a bit more into that. But and I want to respect your need for humanitarian neutrality. So if there's any of these things you want to sort of punt on because of that, but any reflections you want to share about how we can take steps to stop the conflict?
You mean like the outsiders? The outsiders?
Well, no, sorry, just going to Ina first to see if he wanted to weigh in on this issue at all.
Sorry. So, Garnet, you are asking me on especially how you look at the principles and how do you. So, essentially, the 3 steps. 1, stop the war, which is basically including bombing and the strict adherence to the international humanitarian laws. That must be the number one thing. That is stopping the war or the conflict and following that international humanitarian laws very strictly should be the first thing that should be pressed on all parties involved in the conflict. There may be 2 or more visible parties, but in any conflict, there are always here and there many other dynamics in any conflict. So that should apply to everyone. Whether the ceasefire has happened or not, parallelly, we need to improve humanitarian access, both for relief workers as well as for relief supplies. And this is very critical to scale up humanitarian assistance. And there is one more challenge. It's not just the transportation of the problem. Only 50% of the resources funding that is needed. That's the best guesstimate I can give is what is available now. We are talking about half the number of children going to bed hungry every night. And these are not children who are skipping a meal for a day. They've been skipping it on a regular basis. If you just allow me 1 minute to explain what this really means. In any conflict or war zone, children skip the meal. That is natural but unacceptable. That's the first stage, how starvation unfolds. In the second stage, the body starts looking for the fat in every part of the body to keep it alive and running. The third stage is when it really starts attacking anything that is left in bones and marrows. That's a stage where the body starts recognizing and rationalizing why it should spend energy on both the lungs. Can you slow down and focus on one? It just doesn't have energy. Think about tiny children who are almost, dry and completely dehydrated. So it's at that moment when the organ starts slowing down. For example, heart, the drumbeat of vitality starts slowing down, and one day the child dies. That's the most painful way for a child to die and for anyone to watch. You can stop these deaths. It's possible to stop these deaths. It doesn't take medicines even in many instances. They just need food. And it is possible, it's available. But to get that, the war must stop. More resources are needed. This is an underfunded crisis. The Canadian government must and can do more, and they must step in.
So Unni, just to clarify, though, to stop the war, obviously, I think what you're saying is that part of this is we need to impress upon the parties the importance of these issues. They may not be responsive to that, and what are the means that we can use to pressure them to stop the fighting?
In every conflict, this never happens quickly. The whole peace process is often going 1 step forward, going 2 steps backward. We have to keep trying. We have to open different channels for that communication. As also Abier said, there are many parties and many dynamics in this. You have to use the diaspora from many angles. They have some influence on people all over the country, also outside the country. We need to bring in the donors, and most importantly, strengthening the hands of the humanitarian community, including United Nations and others, is absolutely critical. So opening different channels of conversation is absolutely critical. And when it comes to finding solutions for a conflict, there are no untouchables. We need to talk to everyone who is involved, because the priority should be the safety, protection, well-being, and recovery of children. We should be willing to find many means to make it work. And often re-emphasizing the international humanitarian laws. the centrality of protection, especially children, women, not to deploy rape and sexual abuse as war weapons, etc., go a long way to start sending signals to different parties that it is time to find an end to the conflict. So we have to use different channels, diplomatic channels, humanitarian angles, all political angles, and all possible angles.
Yeah, I agree. Abier, we talked about international enablers of the combatants, and in some cases, there's some of the usual suspects that we see that are involved in kind of fomenting conflict in lots of places. For instance, the role that the regime in Iran, the regime in Moscow are playing, but also the UAE has been playing a role, according to many reports, supporting the RSF and calling out those that are involved in supplying assistance to the belligerents and trying to enact policies that prevent a flow of resources to those belligerents. Seems to me, and then I think you said earlier, like an important way to try to stop the conflict. What do you see as the kind of strategic maneuvers being played by some of these external players, and how can we change the calculation for them so that they're not enabling the belligerents that are involved in this war?
Well, when it comes to UAE, it's a mystery for me, because before the war, UAE have like this massive agricultural lands in Sudan. We have all the gold from Sudan going by special plane from Port Sudan to Dubai. Until now, this is happening until now. So they have the gold and they have the agriculture and they have everything. I don't know really what they want more from Sudan. Like nothing left. It's just the civilians. So like sorry for that, but when you buy like 3-4 people who can give you the gold and give you the agriculture and the lands and everything, what else you want? So really, like, if you don't know what these people need or want, you can't help it. You can't help it. The other thing, I can understand why Russia, they have like, they ask for a military base in the Red Sea. And of course, the US wouldn't agree with that. So I understand that kind of like conflict, of interest between these two. But for the UAE, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So we're just trying to figure it out as the Sudanese.
Yeah, I mean, is part of the dynamic kind of a spillover of the proxy war that's been going on in Yemen, where you have the UAE and Iran have kind of conflicting interests and strategies in Yemen. I had heard years ago when the previous president was in that in fact soldiers from Sudan were being used in the conflict in Yemen. And
with the United States and Saudi Arabia. So that's why it doesn't make any sense. You have everything you need from Sudan. You have the men as army, and you have the gold, and you have the agriculture and the lands. So why war in Sudan?
Right. Well, I mean, unless they have specific interests that they're supporting. But obviously, I mean, we have more of a relationship with the UAE than we have with some of the other actors. So this is why it's important to identify and try to dialogue with them about what's happening. And I mean, what about the democracy movement? What can you tell us about kind of the hopes of people to kind of have a third option to these two rival militias?
I can't tell you about hope. I can't tell you about the stop war in Sudan. So when I had this T-shirt, it was in the beginning of the war, but now this T-shirt it's like Hamdok people. It has like a stigma. It's like I'm Hamdok people. So either you are with the army or with the civil society led by Hamdok. I'm not with either part, but I put this shirt because I don't want to be like labeled with one party or another. So for people, even if they saw this shirt, they see this shirt, it will tell them that I am with Hamdok, but I'm not, right? So when you are talking about or with people with that mental status of like either you are with us or with the other party. There is no talk about democracy. You see, it's just like everyone will call for stop the war, but in their way. Like people with the army say, like stop it by killing or Janjaweed, and Hamdok is say just stop it as it is. And so it's so hard to talk about democracy right now, and I don't think the Sudanese government have any capacity, to be honest with you, in a real war to call for elections, maybe, or anything like that. There is no people; they are all displaced. So elections need infrastructure. Democracy need infrastructure that we don't have in place. So I can't see that happening.
Yeah, so it's very hard to put these. I mean, the Sudanese people have been heroic and hopeful and really strived in the midst of this. But you have extremely challenging circumstances, 30-year brutal dictatorship and mass displacement, civil war. I know there are continuing efforts at building up alternatives, but it's obviously very challenging. Thank you both for coming on. I'll give each of you a final word. What are the final points you'd like to leave with our audience in terms of, we've talked about the humanitarian situation, what needs to be done there. We've talked a bit about some of the issues and failures around immigration policy, and also what some of the steps are around a political solution. I would really reaffirm the importance of trying to stop the flow of weapons to either side as being an absolutely critical piece, and holding accountable those that are facilitating horrific war crimes by allowing that flow of weapons to take place. So there's a number of different policy areas that individuals and leaders can focus on. But I'll give the last word to both of you. Anything you want to add? Anything we missed? So maybe Unni, we'll start with you, and then Abier can wrap it up.
First of all, really grateful that you are bringing a spotlight on Sudan. That's exactly the attention that we believe will help to lead to something much more positive. It may not happen overnight, but exactly it is highlighting the issues that are critical. So 2 comments. One, the government of Canada can and should do more, both to stop the war as well as to support humanitarian assistance there. Until that happens, until the ceasefire happens, please do not forget the children in Sudan. And children are telling us, do not abandon the children of Sudan. Canadian public has been generous in the past. I believe that they can definitely contribute and support this, but most importantly, keeping them in your thoughts is absolutely critical. That will go a long way.
Okay, thank you. Abier.
I second what Unni said, and I thank you in person about as you know, like you came to our premises in Toronto and you met with my people in Mississauga, and I see that you are passionate about Sudan, and I hope that this will reflect with the Canadian government acts and actions. We in the Sudanese Canadian Association, community associations, we would like to get more involved with the Canadian government so we can help people inside Sudan, and we work with Plan International to help the people in the neighboring countries. And we are here to help, and we are open to give any suggestion, or we go ourselves back to our country so we can help our people. Thank you.
Okay.
If I may say one more thing.
Sure. Yeah.
It has not been very easy to raise resources also for us. So we have something that's known as a Children in Crisis Response Fund. If anyone is willing to contribute on the Plan Canada website, we very much welcome it. And most of the money goes to local groups, our local partners. And as I said, most of our staff are local, and we definitely welcome support and contributions. But most importantly, thank you for your solidarity.
Okay. Thank you both so much. And I think it is so important to bring attention to these kinds of topics. Obviously, there's a lot going on in domestic Canadian politics as well. But I believe, and I have found, that when Canadians hear these stories and are exposed to this information, they are seized with the importance of having a robust response, and that includes the humanitarian piece and also critically holding bad actors accountable. But I said you had the last word, and I talked, so sorry about that. But Resuming Debate podcast, we release new episodes about every 2 weeks. You can find us on YouTube, but also on all of the regular podcast platforms. Please like, subscribe, leave a review. We share some international content, but also some hard-hitting corruption scandal, domestic content. So it's a good mix of different issues and themes that I'm working on. Please subscribe, leave a review. We'll be back with another episode of Resuming Debate in 14 days.